All right, so the head, when we draw the head, I walked around and some of you had this. The head is like an upside down egg shape. So the way I start drawing the head is I actually do just kind of like a semicircle across the top of my page. So draw really lightly for now, because you can always make your lines darker once you get things looking right. So we're gonna do just kind of a half circle at the top of our page. I'm leaving a little space for hair. I'm gonna draw a little harder than I normally would, just so you guys can see what I'm doing. And this line will actually get erased, so you don't want it to be super hard, because this is a line we normally don't see on people unless they're bald. This is the line of actually the top of your head, like the crown of your head. So that will get covered up with the shape of the hair. So our head is an upside down egg shape. So this is the wider part of the egg. So if we look at an egg, you know how it's got a more rounded end and a more pointy end? The more pointy end is going to be where our chin is. So what I generally do, depending on the person I'm drawing, everybody has kind of a different shape through here depending on their cheekbones. Okay, so it depends on who you're drawing. But in general, I normally draw some lines coming down from that egg shape. This is where you would do some contouring if like the person has higher cheekbones or whatever you'll hear people say or notice on different people. But for now, we can just kind of draw a line coming down from that egg shape. That's actually where our ear will go later, but don't worry about that quite yet. And that's like maybe a little less than the height of that top part. We're doing a section kind of straightish coming down. And then right here is where it starts to angle in for our chin, like our jaw starts underneath our ear. So if you can even feel that on your own face. If you put your finger right under your ear, you can kind of feel where your jaw turns and starts coming forward on an angle. So we're gonna draw that coming down on both sides, the angle of that jawline. And as we're working, we want to try to keep it symmetrical. Our faces are generally pretty symmetrical. Usually they're a little bit asymmetrical when we really start to analyze and look at it close. And then our chin, some people have a little bit more of a square chin, a wider chin, but in general, it turns and kind of comes together here. So this would be the pointier end of the egg, but it's got a little roundness too. It's just not as round and wide as that top edge. So we've got somewhat of an upside down egg shape. If I flip this upside down, you can see it kind of looks like an egg, a little bit with the flat sides more than straight sides, or from curved sides. So here's my head. So we should have that roundness across the top, somewhat straightish coming down the sides, and then the angle of the jaw, and then the smaller curve for the chin. Now we're gonna turn this sideways just because it's easier to find the middle. So turn this sideways for a second. And we're going to, you can measure with your pencil, you can measure with your hand. We're gonna find halfway. So if I take my pencil and I put it about halfway, let's see. We can kind of eyeball it. We can hold our hand up and kind of measure it like this and say, okay, that's about a hand, that's about a hand, so the middle would be here. If you're pretty good at eyeballing it, you can just eyeball it. Just draw a line coming down. You can kind of check and make sure it's about halfway. I think mine's a little bit low. I'm gonna scoot it up a tiny bit. Just find a way to, it doesn't have to be perfect, just try to find the center-ish. That's a good way for me to do it with my hand like that. We're drawing a line halfway down our egg shape. And now we're gonna draw a line coming straight down through the middle of our egg shape. So if you're not sure where the middle is, again, you can kind of use a couple fingers to measure, find the center-ish. If you're pretty good at eyeballing, just draw a very light line coming down the center. This will just kind of help, it'll be a guideline to help everything fall into the right spot. So our eyes, let's start with the eyes. Those are going to start along this middle line here. The way that I draw eyes is I draw just the top curve of the eye first on both sides. Because how many of you have ever been drawing eyes and you're like, I can't get the size the same? Like one's always a little smaller and one's always a little bigger and you can't get them quite right. So don't add all the details to start. That's the biggest mistake. Start with just the curve of the top of the eyelid. So remember, we want about 1 eye distance between the eyes. So I'm gonna put a little dot on either side where I'm gonna start my eye, because that's about as wide as 1 eye. So general rule is we should be able to fit about 5 of these going across the face. So if I take that measurement and I eyeball and kind of come over here and do one and over here and do one, that's generally about how big the eyes should be. I should be able to fit about 5. These always end up being a little smaller for now. Once I add in those cheekbones, this is more true, and the ears. So you can kind of mark where the start and end of the eye is. That always helps, because if we're trying to draw something the same size and make it symmetrical, starting with just a starting and ending point to connect it to is going to help a ton. Make sure those are symmetrical. That's easy to erase if it's not, right? Then we'll draw the top eyelid. So starting at the middle point, we're going to draw a curve coming up, like a little rainbow line or a sad face, and across. And try to get these symmetrical. So mine curves up a little bit more here and is a little bit more of an angle or diagonal as it gets across, but there's all sorts of different shapes of eyes, so yours don't have to be exactly the same curve as mine. Just try to make them match each other. And once we have that started, I like to come in here and erase this line just to get it out of my way. So once those look the same, you can erase that guideline just inside of the eyes for now, so it's out of our way. Before we do too much more detail, just double check that they're in the right place, that they're the right size. Sometimes holding your paper a little bit away from you, like arm's length, helps you to see if they're a little bit strange. Another thing that helps is flipping your paper upside down. So if it's not looking symmetrical, flip it upside down and check it, and sometimes that can help your eyeballs to see what needs to change. All right, now let's go across the bottom. So this curve is gonna be more subtle, generally. Again, it always depends on the shape of that person's eye. Usually this top curve of the eye is a little bit more curved and the bottom is a little less. If you're drawing yourself, you can look at your own shape and see what shape yours are. So we're drawing like the inside of the opening of the eye. Another line people leave out a lot is the line. If you want to look at your camera, turn on your camera and look at your eyes. But a lot of people leave the curve of where our eyes actually, like our eyelids go into when our eyes are open. That curve above your eye, almost everyone has it. Every once in a while, you'll find a shape of eye that really doesn't have that curve, depending on how large and like wide and open the eyelids are. But most everybody has some sort of a curve above the eye where the eyelid goes into, and it's usually right underneath your eyebrow bone. So if you feel your eyebrow bone, feel for where it stops. That's usually where the curve of the eye is. So this is what I'm talking about here. I'll draw it on mine. So this is the part where our eyelids open into, the bottom of our eyebrow bone. So look for that on yours if you want to look at your own face. If not, you can just draw a curve slightly above. This is not our eyebrow. This is the kind of shadow that happens underneath that eyebrow bone. And everyone's shape of this curve is a little different. Sometimes there's a little bit more space here and a little less over here. It just depends on the shape of your eye and the shape of your bone structure. Next, we're going to draw in the iris. So a good way to do this, especially if you tend to draw irises too small, is to take that circle and actually draw the whole thing. So if I could see the entire iris, the whole colored part of the eye, I'm going to draw the whole circle here. Try to make sure it's in the same spot on both sides. Yes, I know we don't see the part that's above, but this will help us to find the placement for the pupil. That's why we're drawing it. I drew that a little tall. I'm at a weird angle in my paper here, so I don't have my face in front of the camera. And then inside of the middle, we're gonna draw the pupil. And that's why we wanna start with the whole circle of the iris, because that helps us find the right placement of the pupil, because that's another thing that people tend to put in the wrong spot. Because generally the iris is resting along the bottom lid, sometimes covered by the bottom lid a little. And a lot of people put the pupil too low. So once you get the pupil in the right spot, then you erase the part of the iris that we don't see. And now you've got the right placement of the iris and the pupil. And then we check for symmetry. We can do that by flipping our paper upside down. If something's looking a little off, that's usually a really good way of kind of checking to see what you can do to make it look a little bit more correct. Is flipping it upside down, just looking at it from a little different perspective usually helps a ton. I'm noticing that bottom lid needs to come up a little bit, actually. So check in with your eyelids. The top eyelid should cover more of the iris, generally, and the bottom lid should cover just the bottom edge of the iris.
She's seriously so pretty.
No, it's her.
Yeah, her actual the person.
So remember, 5 eyes should fit across the face. So one eye in between, and then one eye on either side. So that tells me that this face is too wide. Do you see how it looks strange? So if you make this more narrow, this will look more realistic. I should only be able to fit 5 eyes. So more narrow and those eyes might need to be a little wider. All right, if you want to get really detailed, we can look in the inside corner here, and generally you can see a little bit of, I don't even know, I guess it was like originally our third eyelid. You know, a lot of animals have that third eyelid that covers our eye, but we've changed and evolved. We don't need that anymore. So it's like this little bit of skin that's usually visible in this very center of our eye. You can sometimes see that if you want to draw that in. And eyes are wet, right? They would not work. They would not function if they were not. So if you want to put a little highlight in the eye, that gives a face a little life. Just make sure it's in the same spot in both eyes. So imagine like a little light shining on the eye. Because it's wet, it picks up a highlight. The highlight should be a little bit of a curve because the eyeball is round. So you can pick a spot for your little highlight there. And just so that we don't look creepy as we're continuing to draw, if you want to just make the pupils dark, that usually helps it look less creepy. Because all of our pupils are black, so we can just shade in the pupils just so we look a little bit less weird. Here we go. All right, before we get too far along, we can come back up and do eyelashes in a second here. Let's just sketch in where the nose and mouth are going to go. Let me just check our time here. So let's start with the nose. So the nose is actually going to start at the edge of the eyebrow. So if you feel your face, you can feel that bone start like where your eyebrow starts to grow and follow it down. And you see how it kind of curves down into this bridge of your nose is what we call that, where our glasses rest. So follow that curve from the eyebrow bone down into the top of the nose. Usually in here, depending on faces, we don't have a lot of definition of the nose through this area here, like where the cheeks are. So I usually don't draw the edge of the nose here. Sometimes I'll put a little shadow there when I'm doing like the finishing details. But usually my details when I'm drawing a nose are here, this little curve here, and then obviously where the nostrils and everything are. So if you want to draw with me, I'm going to draw that. So I'm going to draw a little curve coming from where the eyebrow would be. We can draw that in a second. Through the center of the eyes. And this is really more defined with shadow, but we can worry about that later. Let's just draw it as an outline for now. We can erase that little crisscross line if we want to get it out of our way. And then halfway, if we turn our paper, halfway between the eyes and the chin, find a little mark on your paper and just draw on that line halfway between the middle of the eyes, so like that center line that we use to find where the eyes go, and the bottom of the chin. Draw a little mark there, and then halfway between that line and the bottom of the chin, draw another little line. So you should have something that looks like this. Our nostrils are actually gonna rest on top of this line, that first halfway line. So on either side of that line, we're gonna draw a little C. This is gonna be the outside edge of our nostril, and another little C facing each other. I think mine was a little low. So we should have two little C's, a backward C and a regular C. And that should be about the width of one eye. So if we take the width of an eye, we should be able to scoot it down. Mine might be a little wide, but everybody's noses are different. If you have a wider nose, you can leave it. If it feels too wide, just bring them a little closer together. And that is the outside edge of our nostril. And then everybody has that skin, that little cartilage connector between our nostrils. Some people's dip down a little bit. Some people's are a little higher than the edge of their nostrils, and some people's are kind of in line with their nostrils. So if you want to look at yours, you can look in a mirror. If you want to just draw generic, we're going to draw a little tiny C on its side, or a little smiley face right there. I know it looks weird right now. We're going to bring it all together in a second. So we got that little dip. That little smiley face, or that little curved line to show the dip, can be smaller, like more narrow, or wider depending on your nose. Some people's are a little bit wider, some people's are a little bit more narrow. Some people's are even like a little bit pointy coming down. Some people's are more rounded. It's like a weird thing to notice, but when you do, you'll start to notice it. And then on the inside edge of this nostril, I am going to come in just a little bit from that inside edge and curve up and connect to that C. And this shows the opening of your nose hole. So sometimes people have more definition here. Like you actually might see kind of where it comes around and connects to that point if you want to draw that in. Usually adding a little shadow in here, and then a little shadow underneath this center area makes it feel a bit more realistic. So if you want to add a little shadow in there, you can. Sometimes we see more definition where this comes up. We might see a little shadow in here, kind of where the nose starts to come up into the face. Maybe you want to draw that in. Again, I'm just kind of drawing a generic person, so I'm not trying to make it look like anyone specific. Just seeing what happens. So if we wanted to make the nose look wider, we'll just move those C shapes out further. There's a lot of different things we can do to customize that face, make it look more like a specific person. And then most of us have a very subtle, like two little lines that come down from the edge of that little dip of skin right here. We've got those two little lines that kind of lead into our top lip. So it creates a little bit of a divot here. Most of us have something like that on our face. Some people are more defined than others. So if you want to just draw that in really lightly, that will lead you into the top lip, which I usually start with like a little V or a little U shape. So it kind of looks like a little miniature mustache right now. So start with a little V or U shape right underneath the dip, like the connector cartilage of the nose. that's gonna be the top lip. And some people have a lot more space. Some people have less space between their nose and their top lip, so you can look and see if you're drawing a specific person. Try to notice how much space they have. So I start with a little curve, and then the mouth relaxed. So I'm not thinking of a smiling mouth or a mouth with expression, just a relaxed face. The mouth is generally about 1.5 eyes wide. So normally the mouth comes outside of the nose, about 1/2 of an eye, but we want to make it symmetrical. So if we want to draw a line in kind of where the edges of the mouth will come to, make it about 1.5 wide. So I'm just going to draw a little tiny dot here and here. That's going to be the edges of my mouth. Now we have a spot to connect the upper lip to. So we're going to connect that with a diagonal line. So we've got the beginning of the upper lip. If we look in the corners of the mouth with a relaxed mouth, usually they're actually kind of pointing downward, the corners of the mouth. So I usually like to do a little shadow here to kind of capture that edge of where the relaxed mouth would create that kind of downward feel. And then from that shadow, we're going to draw a curve coming down and then across and back up. And then a really important line on people's faces is the line where their lips meet. Everyone's is a little different, kind of like a fingerprint. So when you look at someone's lips, if they're relaxed and just together, really pay attention to the shape of that, like the path of that line. Generally, again, the bottom lip is usually bigger than the top. So I start with a little curve in the center for that line where they meet, just a subtle curve. And then generally it comes to the corner of the mouth. Everyone's is a little different. But if I'm just drawing a generic face, this is how I would do it. And then something else that really makes that bottom lip stand out, if you look in the mirror or if you look at your neighbor, if you can see their mouth, that shadow underneath the bottom lip. Because our bottom lip sticks out further than our face, like it's coming out from our face, it creates a little shadow underneath. And then I'm noticing my chin might need to come down a little bit. I just feel like my lips I drew a little bit big, so I'm just gonna make the chin come down just a bit more so I've got a little bit more space here. So if it feels crowded, just adjust it. I'm drawing from a little bit of an angle too, so normally I'm like right above my paper, so I'm drawing a little bit back from it and it's making things a little stretched out, so I think that's what's happening. So let's do eyebrows and ears and then we'll do hair tomorrow. We're gonna leave our people hairless for today. Sound good? Let's just draw the eyebrows and the ears. So let's do ears first. So in general, ears are in line with the top of the football shape of the eye. So if you take your finger and kind of figure out where the top of your open eye would be and just trace it straight back, that's usually the top of your ear. And then ears are in line with your mouth, the bottom of your ear. Except for if you're really old, because your ears never stop growing. So usually old people have really long, bigger ears. So your ear is gonna start about here, and it's gonna end between the nose and the top lip, somewhere in here. So starting at the topish edge of the eye, ending underneath the nose before we get to the upper lip. And ears really don't come far away from our head. Sometimes. A lot of people draw ears too big. Some people do have ears that stick out quite a bit. In fact, when I had all my ear surgeries, because I went deaf when I was 30 and they couldn't figure out why, and then I ended up having like a tumor in my left ear and my right ear, and I had to have all these things fixed and a bunch of surgeries for it. And my very first surgery, the doctor had to cut off the back part of my ear. So he had to cut from the top to the bottom of my ear and pin it to my eyebrow bone during my surgery, because he had to drill into my mastoid bone to remove the tumor. And when he sewed my ear back in place, he sewed it on, really strange. So it actually stuck out, like this ear was never cut off, so like that's how my ears look on that side. This ear he sewed on like that. And after surgery, and I took the stuff off my head, and I looked in the mirror, and I'm like, I had one ear sticking out like this, and one ear just like how it normally would look, and I go, this isn't gonna work. So I made him, later on, during one of my other surgeries, I made him cut my ear off and sew it back on in the right spot. He was laughing at me. But I said, I wear ponytails, and this is not gonna work. I am too asymmetrical. So it's kind of a weird problem to have, but he did it. We can get into details inside the ear tomorrow. You can just draw kind of the shape of our ears here. And then eyebrows, again, they're gonna start kind of in line with the middle, the inside edge of our football shaped eye. So you can draw the beginning of the eyebrow. The end of the eyebrow should end outside of the eye, so we can make a little dot to kind of show where we wanna end it. And then everyone's are different. So thin, thick, more curved, less curved. You can look at your own, you can look at your neighbor, get some inspiration. Generally, they kind of curve up a little bit and then back down a little bit. You can just make it up. So that's the top edge and the bottom edge of our eyebrow. And when we're actually drawing this in, we'd want to draw in kind of wispy hairs. Let's do eyelashes real quick just so you can kind of get an idea of how to do eyelashes. And then we'll do hair tomorrow. And hair and neck tomorrow. That's another thing that people do really strange is when they draw eyelashes, they draw them straight up like this, like little rays of sunshine. And if you look at your eyelashes in the mirror, they don't grow straight up. They grow out and they curve up at the end. So when we're drawing eyelashes, our eyelashes should actually come out to the side. And they may have a little bit of a curve up at the end, but they're actually growing kind of sideways, especially along the edges, like the sides of the eyes here. They actually grow horizontal. So eyelashes, people have a hard time with because they want to draw them like little rays of sunshine sprouting up from the eyes, but that's not how they grow. So we can draw some eyelashes coming across, coming out sideways, and then maybe curving up at the end there. Same with the bottom. There's usually less eyelashes in the bottom than the top. They go sideways and then come out. So if you want to draw a few little eyelashes in there. We'll add a little bit more to the eyes tomorrow, and then we'll do the hair and the neck and the ear and the extra details on the ears. But that's good for today.